So, as you can see, this is a very short introduction, and I'm sure that you will discuss these issues many times during your studies, mostly from the literary and cultural perspective. The next thing I would like to talk with you about is a very, very short introduction to feminism. So this is a very visible way that culture and even politics reacts to the different things connected with human body, human sexuality, and the gender identity. So what we have are three waves of feminism. The first one in the 19th century, these are the suffragettes, so women who campaigned for the voting rights for women. In Britain, they only got it after the First World War. Earlier, they wanted women to have educational equality, so to allow women students at universities and also to give them access to certain professions such as medicine or the law. The second wave is in the 1960s. It's more concerned with social equality, with fighting the prejudice, the stereotypes, so cultural sexism and discrimination, for example, at the workplace. So one of the things that these women from the second wave believed in was equal pay for equal work. There was recently a very interesting TV series called Mrs. America. If you are interested in that, absolutely go ahead and see it. This is about the struggle of women's rights movement against the inequality in America in the 60s, 70s. The third wave comes from the 1990s, and it's more interested in what is called intersectionality. This is a very hot topic even today. So how the female identity and female gender roles are interwoven with other possible group identities, especially if they refer to minorities or to oppressed groups, such as things related to class, race, or health. And also the reproductive rights, including the right to abortion, but not only, also the right to education and contraception. This is something that, as you know, is not a finished discussion. And here we have some images that show that each of these groups was met with ridicule and criticism, and usually the answer was to all these demands from women: you are ugly. Just as that, the suffragettes who wanted the votes, and the women in the 60s and the 70s who wanted, for example, to walk safely at night without being harassed. And the modern women who want equal rights. The way that their postulates are ridiculed usually has this element that feminism is ugly. So I leave you with that. Of course, it's not a proper and valid argument in discussion. So just a few names from the history of feminism. Probably the mother of feminism in the English-speaking countries would be Mary Wollstonecraft, wife of philosopher William Godwin, and mother of writer Mary Shelley, the one who wrote Frankenstein. This is the mother of the woman who wrote Frankenstein. She was an intellectual, a writer. She wrote a very important book, A Vindication of the Rights of Women, as you can see, during the time of the French Revolution. And what she believed, that women should have the right to education, and not only for the pleasure and benefit of men. Some philosophers like Jean-Jacques Rousseau believed that women should be educated because it makes them better wives and mothers. Mary Wollstonecraft believed they should be educated because it makes them more useful citizens and more conscious and self-realized human beings. So they should not be pets or toys, they should be members of the society and contribute to the society. And according to Mary Wollstonecraft and many feminists after her, it is culture, it is the prejudice, and this is the prescribed gender roles that makes women stupid and passive. In the 19th century we have some more people. We have the suffragettes, but also John Stuart Mill and his wife Harriet Taylor. He was a politician and liberal philosopher. He wrote a lot about freedom. One of his famous books is on liberty, but also the subjection of women, which he wrote together with his wife, but only his name was on the cover because they knew it would sell better. And in this book, women's situation was compared to slavery. Why? Social prejudice and the education and marriage. In the 19th century, an unmarried woman was at a very bad position in the society. So they believed, John Stuart Mill and Harriet Taylor, that women should get equal political rights. They supported votes for women even before the suffragettes. There were several legal changes during the 19th century improving the legal situation of women, such as Matrimonial Causes Act that allowed civil divorce, and Married Women's Property Act, which allowed married women to be owners of property. Then comes the second half of the 19th century. After the Second World War, we have the situation that leads to the development of the second wave and the third wave of feminism. So some names that you might remember: Simone de Beauvoir, the French philosopher and author of a very influential book, The Second Sex. And here is probably the most famous quote from her: "One is not born a woman, but becomes one." So this is the theory of gender performativity before Judith Butler. You have to learn to be a woman. You are not born a woman. You may be born female, but to be a woman, you need to learn social codes and also, unfortunately, very often internalize social prejudice and stereotypes. Then in the 60s, we have Betty Friedan and her very important book, The Feminine Mystique, which talked about American women in the 60s, the wives of the middle class living in the suburbs, in those little beautiful houses with what looked to be happy families, but she observed and she argued in her book that after the war, with the modern society, the situation of the women did not improve much because very many American suburban housewives, such as shown in this image from this period, felt trapped and depressed and unhappy and basically left far away from the real life. Then we have the third wave of feminism, for example, Germaine Greer and her books The Female Eunuch and The Whole Woman. She basically worked on the same issues as Betty Friedan, so the life of the middle class, relatively wealthy women in America, like showing whether another generation, another 20 years of progress in the West changed something for the women. In her opinion, not much. She believed that traditional, suburban, consumerist nuclear family is still an oppressive institution and women are at a disadvantage, and that ideal or normal culturally accepted femininity is full of stereotypes, and she believed women should not accept it. They should do something. They should try to change their society, change the point of view of people. There are no biological differences between male and female brains. This has has been contested, but still it's an ongoing question whether there are significant biological changes in the functioning of the male and female brain. The second book, The Whole Woman, written at the turn of this century, proves that not much has changed after another generation. Two more important feminist writers from America, Naomi Wolf, the author of The Beauty Myth from 1991. She discusses the ideal of feminine beauty, again as a social construct that puts women at a disadvantage. She believes that the patriarchal society tries to make women interested in the looks, in the physical attractiveness, rather than, I don't know, changing the society or developing the full intellectual potential. They are, according to Naomi Wolf, it's a very interesting book, women are made to aspire to unattainable beauty standards, which distracts them from more important issues. She discusses things like cosmetic surgery and eating disorders, and she tries to encourage women to stop paying so much attention to the way they look, because it makes them unhappy and the ideals are not able to attain. She writes at some point that there are around 100 supermodels in the world, and all the rest, the millions and millions of women, do not look like supermodels, so why should they try that? The last in this list is Susan Faludi, the author of Backlash, a very influential book from the 90s as well, which talks about the conservative reaction against women's rights in the 1980s, so the Reagan administration. So the way that popular culture spreads stereotypes about women, especially making a very dualistic juxtaposition between career-minded women who are vilified, who are shown as evil and unfeminine, and the stereotypical suburban wives and mothers. So the popular culture, the films, the music videos, and the magazines for women perpetuate the conservative worldview that woman's place is in the home, looking after children. She challenges that. These women basically challenge all these preconceptions. They try to spread the awareness that there is much more to being a woman than being dependent on men and being only used as a reproductive creature, rather than a full human being with unique potential. The last few slides are just to indicate that the matters of the body are much more complex, and there are all kinds of cultural issues that could be studied around the question of the body. We do not really have a lot of time to discuss them, but just to let you know. For example, fat studies. Well, this is a new thing, so it's not necessarily connected with women, but of course it's more pronounced in case of women because of those stereotypes and beauty ideals. So we have the movements of fat acceptance and body positivity, saying that you shouldn't be shamed or bullied if your body type is not conforming with the ideal. And a very interesting thing, these groups, these minority groups, they give the voice to the oppressed minority to show that usually the prejudice and the stereotypes are socially constructed. The culture takes some sort of biological difference, like here the difference in let's say body fat percentage, and creates stereotypes and promotes discrimination, and this is basically wrong. Then we have queer studies, another vilified type of culture studies, this time relating to the sexual orientation question. If you remember this gender-bred thing. So the LGBT, or lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, also some more letters could be added, like queer, intersex, or asexual. You may Google these terms, they all refer to sexual orientation. So who the people are attracted to, who they want to form couples, partnerships, sexual liaisons with, and are they attracted to the people of different sex, the same sex, or perhaps something else. They all refer to the concept of heteronormativity, that is the cultural belief that heterosexuality is default, is normal. So let's say all the fairy tales for children, they, in the vast majority, if not all of them, except for some very new ones, promote the image that if you are a woman, you should want to find a princess, and if you are a man, no, the other way around. If you are a man, you should want to try to find a princess, and if you are a woman, you should try to find a prince. The norms and stereotypes regarding sexual orientation are perpetuated subconsciously through things like fairy tales. And here is where Judith Butler's theory of performativity is important. So the way people react to these identities and how they behave according to these identities. Two more names to remember: Eve Kosofsky-Sedgwick, the scholar who introduced the concept of homosociality. Homosocial, it means homosocial culture, means the culture that promotes male bonding, not necessarily sexual, but let's say professional connections, mentoring, friendship between men. She was mostly a scholar dealing with 19th century literature, and she wrote a lot about how 19th century literature promotes the culture of men. So women are relegated to the home and family, and men interact socially, even without sexual attraction, but the culture centers around this male interaction. At the workplace, in clubs, through mentoring or friendship. The next one is another quite interesting scholar, Jack Halberstam. She's a queer, he is a queer person, and she writes about the representation of queerness in popular culture. So the perspective of people who do not really identify with either feminine or masculine expression and gender. So what if you do not fit the box? There are two boxes. What do you do if you are outside the box? Then we have Michel Foucault, a very interesting and important historian, and his specialty was theory of ideas. You may recall the word discourse, so the way of speaking. This is the term that he introduced to cultural studies. So the power relations expressed through language. And he believed, a very famous quotation from him is, what is marginal is symbolically central. So the institutions of social control, the prison, the school, the lunatic asylum, he wrote about it quite a lot, also dealing quite a lot with the 19th century. So for example, we have the 19th century had attitudes towards sexuality, and especially problems connected with sexuality in the 19th century, such as homosexuality or prostitution. According to Michel Foucault, there are three ways of discussing these issues in Victorian culture. So the medical discourse, the legal discourse, and the moral or religious discourse. And the way that these behaviors and identities are criticized by mainstream culture usually alludes to one or more of these three discourses. So this is an example of how to use the term of discourse. Another type of studies connected with the body, disability studies. This is an interdisciplinary approach to construction, representation, and social meaning of disability. So the perspective of people who are, well, like here in this image, for example, who use wheelchairs. So people with all kinds of disabilities, physical, intellectual. This is very often connected with the intersectionality perspective. So the layering of different identities. So the combination of disability with race, gender, class, sexuality, and other issues, usually also related to the body. The traditional way of culture to deal with that was the so-called charity model. So people with disabilities are unfortunate and in need of assistance. If you know anyone who uses a wheelchair, ask them how they feel about it. They basically will tell you something strong if you try to approach them through this perspective. And of course, there is enough space in culture studies to give them the right to express their identity and to express their perception of the world. An example, again from the 19th century, the Victorian freak show. So the people with some sort of disabilities and abnormal bodies, irregular bodies, and how the Victorian culture treated them. We have some examples here. For example, Joseph Merrick, The Elephant Man. There's a very, very famous and good film about him by David Lynch. Charles Stratton, General Tom Thumb, so-called. These are the professional names. Professional names given by these people because very often they were performers. So were they artists or victims? Google them. There are some new expressions of this problem, like here we have the film The Greatest Showman, showing the career of a man who turned or tried to turn the freak show into theater and performance. So that's quite an interesting take. And another TV series, American Horror Story, The Freak Show season. So that's it. This is what you can do with the body. And next week we'll talk about a specific type of relations concerning the body, that is the family and marriage. Thank you.